Hello and welcome to Make It Happen, episode number 23. Well, hello, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dee Gardner. Hi, Dee.
Hi, Ali. Lovely to see you in person.
Good to see you. So give the ladies who may not have met you yet a bit of a heads up as to who Dee Gardner is.
Okay. I'm the CEO and the founder of Fountain Retreats. We have a group of companies, but the main company I know we're going to talk about today is actually the physical retreat company that we've launched in the UK, and we also have retreats in Ireland, and we're expanding out to your neck of the woods in Spain.
Okay, exciting. So tell us a bit about your background. Where did your professional story start?
Well, I've always been fascinated by human behaviour. It stems really from being a small child. My father suffered from quite acute bipolar disorder for many, many years, and he was just sort of borderline schizophrenic. So I grew up with that and watching the effects and the impact on mental health within the family unit. And around about age 15, I started studying human behaviour and the psychology behind bipolar and other disorders. Of course, it was called manic depression then, not bipolar. Bipolar was called depression. And it was treated really quite appallingly when you go back in history, in the 1960s and the 1970s. It wasn't great treatment. And had he been treated now, things would have been very different for him. So I made a conscious decision soon after my daughter was born, actually, when I was in my early 20s, to then start studying professionally. And I qualified as an advanced psychotherapist. I'm also qualified in hypnotherapy, and I quantify it as a consultant behaviourist. That's my field of expertise, let's say. I'm not practicing now. I'm lapsed, as they say, but I'm actually retired. I'm far too busy at the moment to see people on a one-to-one basis. But then my professional career grew after I qualified, and I held my own private practice for around 12 years and saw many hundreds of people and a whole cross-section. And so mental health just became a complete passion, and it kind of took over my life. And I can see now that everything that I do is formed from the basics of good mental health. I feel it's so important because if you feel good up here, chances are you're going to feel good physically as well. So that's at the core of our retreats too.
Okay, good. So you mentioned and touched on Fountain Retreats. What is your unique mission at Fountain Retreats, and why did you start it?
Well, I've not long turned 50. In fact, I keep saying I've just turned 50, but actually it was December. I wondered how long I can keep saying I've just turned 50. I think I might track it until December.
It's like when you wish people a Happy New Year, isn't it? And you're in Easter.
Yes, when do you stop? So I am 50 and a half.
Okay.
Funnily enough, something resonated with me when I turned 40, and I had a friend of mine that at the same time she turned 50, and we were sat drinking coffee in a cafe and just chatting about aging really, and she was on a real downer. She just turned 50, and she said to me, "Dee, you don't want to get to my age." To me, that was horrific, just hearing her say that, because she's normally been so happy and bubbly and assertive. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I feel completely invisible now."
Wow.
And there was this is going back sort of 10 years ago, and there was this sort of media presence about being invisible at 50, and I do remember it.
Yeah.
In the newspaper, I don't know whether you do. And I just sat with her thinking, okay, I'm 10 years away from that, feeling far from invisible at 40. And that stuck with me until my 50th birthday. And I'm far from invisible. I'm still far from invisible. But I realised that actually a lot of that is a state of mind. And even though that she was a successful businesswoman, she still is, but she's retired now. a successful businesswoman, she still felt, because she was going through menopause, actually, she didn't realise she was perimenopausal at that stage. She was starting to feel the effects of perimenopause, which was isolating her, because she felt that she didn't have anybody to talk to. She couldn't talk to her husband. Her kids weren't really interested because they were off doing their own thing. And so I could see that actually it was that isolation and that feeling of things are changing for me, and I'm aging, and perhaps she felt that she was aging quite quickly, and that made her, it knocked her off balance. And so as I started to approach 50, I started thinking about that conversation and some of my friends who have turned 50 before me, and sadly some friends that I've lost that haven't reached 50. So that's another reason for doing this, and feeling quite proud to be 50. It's denied to an awful lot of women. And so as I reached perimenopause, which is in my mid-40s, it was actually 44 when I really recognised it. Although, like most women, I didn't recognise it as perimenopause.
Yeah.
I thought I was going a little bit mad. I had a whole year of brain fog, and quite chronic for me, because I'm normally a very in control person. I'm very on top of things. You know, I'm quite an organised person, and I just had this year of, what have I come in here for? Where are my car keys? Have I locked the door? Did I turn my straighteners off? All those things, you know.
Yeah.
And it became really quite consuming and worrying actually. At the same time, my elderly mum was going through some issues as well, and she's recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So those things were sort of playing on my mind a little bit. And then I started focusing my attention. So this was some years ago now, but I started focusing my attention on art. I took up art, which I used to do when I was much younger. I had a bit of time when I was 44. We were living out in France at the time, and sort of almost semi-retired really. So I had a bit of time to pick up some paintbrushes and started focusing on my art. And that really helped. So recognising that just focusing on actually one thing and getting your brain to start thinking about that one thing again, turning off everything else, turning off all the noise, really helped. And not just that on its own, but I also practiced self-hypnosis and all those sorts of things. So I started treating myself just to refocus my mind. I realised it was perimenopause after 6 months or so, and started then researching it and helping myself. So when that started, and I'm still perimenopause, even though the average age is 51, I'm 50 and a half, even though I know it's not going to happen overnight, you know. Your periods don't just stop at age 51. I've got a sister-in-law who's in her mid-50s now, and she's still perimenopause, so I think sometimes it can go on for quite some time. But when you start to learn the basic things that you can do to change your diet, lifestyle, exercise habits, you know, just changing your routine a little bit, it makes a huge difference. And so I started thinking about what I wanted and needed, and that's how the retreats were born. We haven't looked back really.
Okay, so the retreats are very much focused on the menopause, and you've
definitely.
You've built them around 4 key elements. So what are the 4 key elements that you've built those around for women that are perimenopausal mainly, or women that are going through the menopause as well, or it's both?
Both, absolutely both. Ideally, we would love to see women that are in their 40s. You know, let's reach women early, because perimenopause is, you don't even really think about it until you're there. And then often you get symptoms, and some of them can be really debilitating, before you then start perhaps Googling things and start questioning, why am I feeling like this, or why are my periods so heavy now, or so irregular, and that kind of thing. So it doesn't happen overnight. There's this kind of gradual change in symptoms, and some of them can be completely random. I have to say, I'll tell you one that I had. which perhaps some other women feel the same. Itchy armpits, would you believe? You know, people talk about brain fog and night sweats and hot flushes and that kind of thing, but I had itchy armpits for a while. And actually, it's because obviously under here you're hormonal, your skin's changing as well. Lots of women present with itchy skin, but for me, it was my armpits. It was driving me mad. Tender breasts, you know, your breasts can get quite lumpy and tender. That's not something to ignore. Obviously, as you're reaching 50 or in your 50s, you ought to still go and get checked. You could have cysts. You might be due a mammogram, that sort of thing. So it's not something to ignore at all. But we do want to catch women early.
Okay.
Let's talk about menopause early rather than when you're fully blown into symptoms. And not everybody has symptoms. Some women breeze through the menopause. They barely experience anything. And how amazing that is, you know, if only that was true for everybody. But your diet and lifestyle plays a massive part with symptoms. When you look at other countries like Japan, Japanese women barely have any menopausal symptoms, and that's down to diet and lifestyle.
Okay.
So we need to recognise there are a few things that we can do to help ourselves, but you've got to be committed to just making those changes. And gradually, you know, life just gets better.
Okay, so the 4 key elements that you've built the retreat round are
yoga, because we wanted to introduce women to a form of exercise that wasn't necessarily aerobic or seen as hard work. This isn't a boot camp, you know. This is a lovely experience. And yoga, when we talk to women at our age, that kind of midlife, and you talk about exercise, yoga is often the thing that they say, oh, I wish I could go to a yoga class, or I wish I could tried yoga, or have started yoga, or it's on our minds to try yoga. And often you don't want to go to a class because you're worried about starting a class. Everybody else is really experienced and you feel like the odd one out. Or perhaps you've got body images, body shape issues, you know, where you think maybe you're overweight and you can't do it. I know I'm carrying a few extra pounds, but I can still do yoga. Yoga is very gentle, and the way that we introduce it from our instructors who are of a certain age, let's say, they understand the mature midlife body. We know we're not as bendy as we were in our 20s and our 30s. So we get very real about, you know, what we can and can't do. So that gentle introduction to yoga, that is a universal exercise. Everybody recognizes the word yoga, don't they? They all kind of know what yoga is. So we teach women how to use yoga to help with menopausal symptoms. And it's very, very effective. And of course, it's very good for anxiety disorders. It can really help with that. We practice mindfulness, so that lessens anxiety. But also, as we age, we become more at risk of osteoporosis. And yoga can be very good for improving bone strength, which is good for us all. And then they meet our qualified nutritionist. Now, our nutritionist is supplied by Marion Stewart. I'm not sure if you're aware of Marion. She's quite a health guru in the world of women's health. And she's written, I think, about 27 self-help books over the years. She used to have her own TV show back in the 1980s and 1990s. Very credible, has lots and lots of scientific research to back up a lot of her claims to do with nutrition. So she's the founder of the natural menopause movement. Now, that's not to say that we are all in all natural menopause, because HRT works incredibly well for a lot of women.
Right. Yeah.
So we're an information centre rather than a you must do it this way or you must do it that way. For a lot of women, a natural approach can work in harmony with HRT. You don't have to separate the two. But Marion's nutritionist talked to us then about diet and how we can get our phytoestrogens, which can help replace the estrogen that we've been losing through menopause. And that's really important for liver function, kidney function, eye function, you know, body function on the whole. Hormones are very good for us. and they help us with our bones and that kind of thing. So she'll talk about deficiency in nutrients and how we can get it through a plant-based diet. She does talk about certain meats that you can eat if you do eat meat, but it's all still very appropriate to those who are vegetarian and even vegan. So very, very interesting topics of conversation and education that goes on through that nutritionist session. We're introducing some new elements where they'll be tasting things like a variety of dark chocolate. How wonderful is that? Chocolate tasting, because dark chocolate, as you may know, has been proven to help because of the antioxidants, and it can lower blood pressure and that kind of thing. So we thought we'd include a little bit of chocolate there. And we also want to experiment with some non-alcoholic wines. You know, for people who, we don't want to say, right, give up alcohol, but alcohol does and can exacerbate hot flushes and night sweats, and, you know, it dehydrates us and all those things. We know we're not supposed to drink so much. So we want to show women that actually sometimes just the feeling of holding a glass and drinking wine with your friends and being sociable has less to do with actually what's in the glass. So perhaps alternate, have a bit of non-alcoholic wine. You'll still get the buzz of being with your friends and feel like you're drinking something. It's very psychological. So we're going to do some wine tasting with non-alcoholic wine, just so that we can open our minds up to other possibilities and help women reduce. We're not saying give up alcohol, you know, just reduce alcohol from your diet or water it down, drink spritzers, that kind of thing. Then they get to speak to our nurses, and the nurses are qualified and they have a specialism in menopause. And again, our nurses are of a certain age, they understand our bodies, they will either be perimenopause themselves or going through menopause or get out the other side. They'll all have their own story. We feel it's very important to talk about the biology, what's actually happening to us. And that's why we wanted to incorporate a more medical, clinical side to the retreat, because I know certainly for me, it's invaluable to understand the biology of our bodies. You know, what's actually happening down there? And how is that affecting up here? You know, what's going on? So the nurses will talk about that. It's very interactive. It's a lot of fun. Nurses are a giggle, I tell you. They are a lot of fun. And then afterwards they'll have an opportunity to fire questions at the nurses. You know, talk about things that perhaps you can't talk about to anybody else. But when you're in a group of girls, you know, we'll listen. We're all going through the same things.
Yeah.
Then have a session with our psychotherapist, and again with a specialist interest in what's happening during menopause. This is very, very important, because we know that anxiety disorders creep in, even for women who've never been anxious before. Suddenly they start getting really anxious during perimenopause and they don't understand why. And sadly, I've learnt over the years that women can be misdiagnosed with early onset dementia, would you believe, when actually the symptoms of perimenopause, which is very, very sad. I find that very sad. Lots of women are treated with antidepressants for perimenopause. It's not required, you know, and more often people are misdiagnosed with depression. The word depression it gets sort of bandied around, but actually more often we feel lonely or sad. It's not actually clinical depression. So we talk about what depression actually is, and even though you may feel depressed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are fully depressed. It may just mean that you're struggling to cope. And there are ways to reverse that, and quite quickly. So we offer techniques and we talk through anxiety and why it's happening, what's happening to women, to give them a real boost. And I tell you, at the end of that session, they feel like they can take on the world. It really is a boost to your brain and your soul. Just a wonderful, wonderful day. And that's our aim, that at the end of that day, we have a choice of 1 day or 2 days. The 2-day retreats, which do take place in Spain and in the UK, So women have the option of just coming for a day. So you would arrive at around 9:30 in the morning. We have the option of non-residential or residential for the retreats.
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to make it clear. So day 2 is the same format. So you've still got yoga, nutrition, the nurses session and the psychotherapist, but we go into much more detail. Of course, you've got more time. So we'll recap on day 1, but actually then we just extend what it is that we've been talking about on day 1.
So give us your three tips for any women who think they may be perimenopausal and aren't sure what next. Because I've also heard of a psychotherapist here who thought her patients were going through depression and then suddenly had a light bulb moment. They're actually perimenopausal. So I think there's lots of women that will be watching this or listening to this who will have these light bulb moments, that even the itchy armpit, I actually had that and didn't even associate that with being perimenopausal.
No.
I just thought it was my deodorant, so I changed my deodorant.
Me too. We went through loads of deodorants thinking, perhaps my skin's changing, perhaps I've got very sensitive or that. No, it is hormonal. Thankfully, I'm over it now.
Yeah.
I'm probably itching somewhere else.
So give us your 3 top tips for any women who think that they could be perimenopausal. How do they find out if they are, and what should be what can you suggest that would help them?
Okay, well, because it's a natural life phase, it's not necessary for you to go to your doctor and try and get tested for it. It's not necessary. However, you can have hormonal tests, but your hormones will fluctuate all the time. So they are kind of inconclusive. So the easiest way to recognise perimenopause is through your symptoms. But some of the symptoms, the way that they present, you might then start to get worried about perhaps illness or disease. So I wouldn't say ignore illness or disease. You shouldn't do that. But you can at least then rule it out. And once that's been ruled out, then you can then just focus on the hormonal changes that are happening to you. I'll give you an example. I had heart palpitations. Now, this is very common. Heart palpitations, this went on for about 2 weeks. And I kept thinking, it's because I'm carrying a bit too much timber, and I'm doing too much, and so my heart's having to work a little bit harder. But I was secretly getting really quite worried about this, and this went on for 2 weeks. And I said to my husband, I'm going to have to go and see my GP. So I did, and had a couple of ECGs, and my heart activity was fine. There was nothing wrong with my heart, but I didn't believe it because I knew how I was feeling when I was having the heart palpitations. And so I got referred to a GP who specialised more in heart. And he didn't have a great bedside manner, I have to say. But he told me that there was nothing wrong with my heart, but that I was having panic attacks. So, being a psychotherapist, I was thinking, panic attacks? Well, I'd recognise those, wouldn't I? And I just remember coming out of the doctor's surgery and sitting in my car, piecing things together and my behaviour and the heart palpitations and thinking, good grief, yeah, they're panic attacks. I'm having anxiety attacks. And from that day to this, and that I was 44, I haven't had one since because my brain started to recognise what it was, and it was an anxiety attack. But perimenopause was not discussed at all, not even with the practice nurses. So heart palpitations is certainly something to look out for. And that level of anxiety, that kind of extreme anxiety, I'm not an anxious person, I never have been. And I feel that, I manage my own anxiety very well. But that took me by surprise. And it really can feel as if you're having a heart attack. It's very, very uncomfortable. So do think about that. If you're having heart palpitations, do think about it being anxiety. And that's where just go sit somewhere quietly, practice your breathing. It's where yoga and things like that come in, very useful. just to calm yourself down, because it is anxiety. Yeah, it's worry that's creeping in there, but it's via our hormones. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
So tips: don't be frightened. That's the biggest thing. People get very frightened. I was talking to a bank manager, funnily enough, the other day. You can't make this stuff up. So I went for a meeting. We're changing over our banking, and then I go into what turns into a 3-hour meeting. Not about money at all, but actually about menopause, with a lovely lady who's in her mid-30s. Now, even though she's in her mid-30s, and of course, some people may not understand, but menopause can be induced by surgery or illness. So, menopause can happen much earlier than your 40s. And in fact, there are women that through surgery or cancer and that kind of thing, they have to have their womb and their ovaries removed. And they can be in full-blown menopause even in their 20s, which is very frightening for them.
Yeah.
I was chatting to this young lady who was just absolutely gorgeous, but she had a terrible time after her 2 sons were born, hormonally. And so we got talking about that. And one of the things that really upset me and moved me was her fear of menopause. And I think it's such a shame that women are fearing menopause. It's a little bit like fearing childbirth. There's a lot of this kind of fearing having a baby because it's going to be painful.
Yeah.
But you get a reward for that. Menopause, you don't really get too much of a reward. But not having periods, I have to say that will be a reward when that happens to me.
Yeah, but I always say to people, I end up spending more on vitamins and treatments since I've gone through the menopause than I ever spent on sanitary products. It's not any money, but I'm probably spending more.
But the fear, we really want to remove that fear of menopause. It doesn't have to be a frightening thing. And as I say, diet and lifestyle plays a big part. So if you want to reduce the symptoms and the severity of a lot of the symptoms, we have to look at how we live, what we drink, what we eat, how much exercise do we take. We are aging, but let's not fear aging. I've never feared it because I actually love the stuff I know now. As you get older, you just know stuff, don't you? And it stops you from making silly mistakes that you might have made when you were younger. 1 in 7 of us are going to reach 100 years old. So we've got to think about the next half of our lives.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
If we're going to live that long, let's make sure that we live healthily and, that we can actually enjoy those years rather than fear them. So that's pretty much the core of what's happening at the retreats. And, my top tips are just you've got to live your life to the full. You absolutely must not fear. Don't fear things. Fear prevents you from enjoying life. And find as much information as you possibly can. There's a lot of stuff on Google, but some of it is quite conflicting. So we want to bring all the information into one place so we can openly discuss it with experts who know what's happening. We use NICE guidelines as well, which is UK government guidelines, and talk about up-to-date treatments. The Edwardians used to treat women terribly going through menopause. Try Googling that. It's quite shocking what they used to do to us. It's no wonder they thought we were mad. We were absolutely mad. They would treat us with the squeezed juices of a guinea pig. I mean, really, how did you think that was ever going to make us happy?
Or the guinea pig.
Either one. So I'm really sorry times have moved on.
Let's hope so. Another big area, obviously, of perimenopause and menopause is actually explaining to our partners, loved ones, even children, what we're going through. So how is the best way to communicate that?
Okay, mood swings. Now, statistically, most marriages break down during menopause years, which is really awful. And mood swings play a role in that. You know, you can be perfectly happy and upbeat one day or 1 minute. It doesn't have to be a day. 1 minute, I'm perfectly happy. The next minute, I turn into Beelzebub. You know, it really is as cut and dried as that. We can swing around our feelings and emotions, but we don't really know what's happening or why we feel like that. And I recognise that with my own husband. You know, I'd wake up, everything was fine, but I'd wake up in the morning and, you know, I could quite easily probably hold a pillow over his head, let alone anything else. You know, obviously I'm joking, darling. I wouldn't at all. I'm sure he watched this back. But the worst thing that can happen is when you're in that, having a tough day, having a tough moment, in that negative mindset, which happens to us all, you don't want people saying to you, what's the matter? What have I done? Are you all right? What? Because we can't articulate what's going on. So I formulated something.
Oh.
If you can see this.
Okay.
This is called the Sisterhood Brooch. Now, it is just a brooch, but actually it's a lovely silver one, fountain with a couple of old birds taking some water from the fountain, which I thought was quite symbolic. But by putting your brooch on, and this comes in a lovely pouch, and also comes with an instruction. It's quite a small instruction leaflet. It doesn't need to be very big. When you're in a bad mood, put your brooch on, because if your loved ones understand you're having a tough day when you're wearing your brooch, trust me, it works. They treat you like royalty. It must give you a wider berth, give you some time to actually move past your mood swing. And then when you take the brooch off, they kind of breathe a sigh of relief and they know that everything's back to normal. But it's just a very symbolic way of not saying, leave me alone, but actually that is what you're saying, because you need that space. It also takes away the angst that you can have with you and your partner, because your partner feels he's done something wrong. So there's guilt there, and that just builds. Yeah. And then tensions build, and you end up in a full-blown row over nothing. It's just because you're actually probably being a bit mean. Because you can't articulate what's happening to you. So the Sisterhood Brooch is a really good way of symbolising I'm having a tough day, and then everybody just treats you beautifully, gives you that wide berth, or makes you a cup of tea, or, you know, can I get you a footstool, mum, or, you know, all those sorts of things. So we feel like princesses, and then our mood swings change very quickly. It's lovely.
Good.
Taking charge, taking control.
Okay. So some great tips there, and great advice. I'm waving my Costa Women Make It Happen magic wand. What dream would you like to make a reality?
Oh, wow. Since we launched, which was November the 5th last year, which was when we launched our franchise sales. So we wanted to get as many women involved with Fountain Retreats as we possibly could, because it's women that are going through perimenopause or menopause that we wanted to run the retreats. So they totally get what's happening and have much more empathy with our guests. And at the moment, I think we have 32. Wow. Got some more in training actually the day after tomorrow. And we're slowly just sort of winding the franchises, the sales of franchises down in the UK, because we have covered pretty much most of the UK. Yep. And we've got Malaga covered in Spain at the moment, and Barcelona, and we're hoping sort of Alicante around that area is coming soon too, and probably a few more areas to come in Spain as well. Our magic wand is we want to reach every woman. There are 13 million in the UK. Of course, I don't live in Spain, but there are 13 million women at any one time going through menopause or perimenopause in the UK alone. This affects half the population, let's face it. Yeah. Every woman on this planet. Even Japanese women who may get away with some symptoms, but they still experience menopause, of course. And we've had inquiries from New Zealand, Australia. We're going to be expanding our network firstly out into America and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and that's all planned over the next 6 to 12 months. We have an online version that will be launched later this year as well. So for women who are perhaps carers at home, so they can't get out to the physical retreats, perhaps they have some disabilities, for whatever reason, they can't get to a physical retreat, we will be offering the same content in a similar delivery, but very interactive through the use of video on an online platform, which is quite special actually. And we're hoping to launch that around October, November time this year. And very affordable for women too. So they can access that help through the online version. So although, of course I have this dream, there's an awful lot of work still to do, and we have a lot of women on this planet to reach, but bit by bit, we're going to get there. And the online version will be global. So that's not just allocated to one country, that will be around the world.
So if women want to get involved either as a franchisee or they want support and help, which is the best place for them to find you?
We are very prevalent on the social media sites. So Facebook, if you just put in Fountain Retreats, then you'll find us that way. Twitter, we have a very active Twitter account, which is @FountainBrand. So if you want to join us on Twitter, and on Instagram, it's The Menopause Experts. So on those 3 social media sites, you'll find us. There are 2 websites. We have a website for booking retreats, which is fountainretreats.com, where they can find information and book retreats through there. But there's also our more sort of magazine blog style website, which is themenopauseexperts.co.uk. So they can have a look at both those websites, and they both interlink as well, so they won't miss anything. So it's a privilege to work with women of our age group, and we've still got so much to offer the world, Something that I say, and I really love to get this across to any woman that's listening to this, something to remember. We are actually the most powerful women that have ever walked this planet. And we really are. Yeah. So let's make a real difference. I've got 3 daughters. One I can claim giving birth to. The other 2 feels like I gave birth to them, but actually they're stepdaughters. And they're all in their 20s. And, what a fantastic legacy we can all leave behind us for the next generation you'll say the word menopause and it makes them feel great. Not bad, not frightened. It makes them feel really good. There was a time when we couldn't talk about pregnancy, periods. God blimey, as women, we do go through it, don't we? We do have all these hormonal ups and downs. But, more often than not, we can get through it with a smile on our faces, and we're quite a powerful species. We can do some wonderful things, and collectively, we all know as women, we're so strong when we work together.
No, we can do a lot. And on that very positive note, thank you very much, Dee Gardner, for joining me in the Make It Happen studio today.
It's been my pleasure, Ali. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you're a woman who's living in Spain or a woman who's thinking about moving to Spain, come and join us at costawomen.com. It's completely free to join. Please also come and follow us on YouTube or listen to our recordings via Spotify. Just look for Costa Women Make It Happen.